This is Off-Road Independence, episode number 34. This podcast is brought to you by beginnersfab.com, the site that teaches you how to make useful, interesting, and creative things with basic tools. Think you don't have the fabrication tools necessary to make what you need? Think again. beginnersfab.com. Hey everybody, this is Eric with Off-Road Independence, and today I want to bring to you a new site. It's called banhammer4x4.com, and this site really looks like it's going to be something cool for the off-road community. What is it? Well, it's a bunch of stuff, but the part that I really like is the product reviews here. Why so? Because if you go down here and you look in here, you see a basic description of it. You get a rating at the top left that talks about the value and the function of it. And then down you see it has strengths, weaknesses, and the overall idea of it. And if you go down here to where I'm at, you can click on those who have reviewed the product and you get to see their profile. You can actually see things such as their ride or their vehicle that they're using, all the specs of their vehicle, and you also get to see what it was built for and what they would do differently. That gives you a realistic review that can be very close to what you're looking for. That's really cool. To be able to do this though, go by banhammer4x4.com, go over here, it'll say log in for you, register there, and then you can set up your own profile and start helping this community grow. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show, to Off-Road Independence Podcast. I am with Agustin Jimenez today. We're going to talk a little bit. I've been begging him and prodding him to come on the show for a little while, and he's been like, I don't know, and I'm like, don't worry, I won't make too much fun of you. And so we're gonna chat a little bit today and have a good time is the hope. So really today what we're going to do is kind of get to know Agustin. My goal is that he'll enjoy the show enough to where he'll want to come on again and we can talk up some topics and stuff. But that's kind of the plan today. And if he'll quit looking at flies flying around or a bee or whatever it is, we can focus on off-roading. I'm just messing with you.
It was one of those big beetles flying around.
Oh yeah, those things are cool. Well,
yep.
What kind of the big ones, right?
Yeah. They call them. I know in Spanish they call them mayates.
Yeah.
But I don't even know
what they are in English.
But
yeah. Well, if we break into Spanish a little bit, you guys will have to forgive us. There will be terms, Gusto, that I just say in Spanish because that's what comes to mind first, you know. So. Don't let me go down that rabbit hole because I will accidentally start just speaking in Spanish and forget that I'm talking to English-speaking listeners. So
absolutely,
you can't let me do that. That would be bad.
We'll try.
Let's just get started with the basics. And honestly, these are some of these questions I'm going to ask you are just going to be questions I don't even know the answer to yet because unlike most of my podcasts. Guest, I haven't even really talked to Gusto that much before the show. I mean, we've chatted on Facebook and that kind of stuff, right? I mean, but not like getting to know each other as far as like your background and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Which is a little different because typically I've talked to people for like 30 minutes before the show starts or whatnot, okay? So, who are you? Like, your name is Agustin Jimenez, right? And you live where in the States?
I live in Los Angeles,
California. And what do you do for work?
So I'm actually a automotive journalist. I used to work for the Four Wheeler Network, which John Kappa was part of that as well. He was the editor in chief of Four Wheeler. So you could say he was my boss for a while. Recently, I did a switch over to the Mustang group within the company. So now I'm officially the tech editor for Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards.
Ah, yeah. Now, don't get confused, people. I have a reason for talking to Gusto today. He writes for Mustang, but he does like off-roading. We know that.
Right.
So that's why we're talking to him. And actually, he has some pretty cool rigs. So we'll talk about that too. Now, I guess you're like a subcontractor, what is it called? I forget.
I actually work for the company now. I used to be a freelancer in the past, and that was really great because you have a lot of spare time to just you basically do jobs that you want, and so you get a lot of free time for yourself. But obviously, the pay isn't so great if you're not on it all the time.
Yeah.
Once I got hired by the company, there was a lot more work involved, but it's still pretty great because you still get to do a bunch of fun stuff. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, like
Sorry, my chair is all messed up. Go ahead.
yeah. At the end of the day, we all get to go out and go wheeling. On occasionally every maybe 2 months or so, we'll all go out to the desert or out to the beach or wherever it may be. Depending on the heat.
And how is it that you made the swap over from like four-wheel journalism, 4-wheel drive and off-roading journalism to Mustang journalism?
Well, it does seem kind of difficult, but I got into the whole hobby of anything automotive really through pretty much was hot rod. Reading hot rod as probably like in my early teens, like when I was 13. I was just a huge fan of it. Reading David Freiberger stuff, and somehow when I turned 18, I got into the off road world, and just the freedom of being able to go out in your own rig and go out wheeling the local canyon, just hitting some mud, just stuff like that. It really got me into it, and it ended up being one of those things where, for me, it's real easy to just switch over from a mentality of the off-road riding over to the mentality of what the Mustang enthusiast is used to reading.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I've read for years, all kinds of automotive journalism, whether it be something more refined from like Motor Trend. No, not Motor. I'm sorry. What is the book? It's a magazine, but it's basically a book that comes out, and it's all like the supercars and all that stuff that they talk about. It's like really. What?
Automobile?
Yeah, I think it is automobile, but it's like quarterly or something. It's like a thick book. You see them at like some of the bookstores sometimes, but it's like a $12 magazine that you buy or whatever, and it's like super refined in the way that they write and everything. And it's like I've read everything from that kind of stuff all the way down to just blogs, that people have about cars and off-roading and stuff. So it really is very interrelated, with all that. And the suspensions are very similar, modified, yeah, but very similar for hot rods and off-road vehicles a lot of times too. So,
right.
So it makes sense. Now,
yeah, absolutely.
What rigs are you driving now?
So right now, my daily driver is a 2003 Ford F350 Super Duty. It's a 6-liter diesel, which I get. It's probably the worst engine to have, except we've done the R&D on pretty much all the fixes for that engine with Bulletproof Diesel. And so the help of Bulletproof Diesel out in Mesa, Arizona, Diesel Tech out in San Jacinto, California, and South Bay Truck and 4x4. They've all been a huge help in getting that truck basically to be a reliable daily driver. It used to be an old magazine truck that was once a SEMA build, and basically it got beat up and abused by many people in its past. And so the editor that had it before me, he took pretty good care of it, got it back into shape, and we've just we always wrenched on it and kept it kind of going, and it's become a pretty reliable daily driver. I drove it all the way out to Moab earlier this year for Easter Jeep Safari. It was a 770-mile drive for me. Drove it all the way out there, wheeled it on a pretty fun trail called Gold Bar Rim. It was on Full Size Invasion, and which actually John Kappa was one of the guys that started that run. Him and Jared Jones, who was the editor of Off Road, he's the one that was taking care of that truck in the past, the one that I'm driving. And the truck wheeled really great, despite having open diffs. It was amazing, and had a great time, and drove it all the way back. No issues at all. It was pretty fun. That's probably I'd say my go-to daily driver right now, especially with fuel costs. Diesel is a lot cheaper right now.
Okay.
At least in Southern California. So yeah.
Now, what is diesel actually less than gas again, or is it still higher than gas? But because of the economy, the mileage, it gets better.
Right. Yeah, typically, you'll find that generally speaking, diesel will be a little bit more expensive. However, in Southern California, gasoline is a lot more expensive right now. Um, so it's about I'd say 350 to 370 a gallon
Hmm.
for gasoline, and for diesel, I think I think I filled up at might have been like 289 a gallon.
Okay, so it's actually
290.
gone cheaper than gas.
Yeah, it always kind of fluctuates. So there's always the argument of, well, diesel truck make any sense because gas is cheaper right now, and like that's the argument at times. And I'm like, well, it always fluctuates, so that doesn't really play a role into it, especially when you consider that while a gas vehicle might get better fuel economy, idling around in Southern California traffic, it's not going to achieve the greatest mileage.
No,
So
it's not. And well, I mean, it really depends on each person, their circumstances too, right? Because
right,
like here, I have a diesel. I did a diesel swap into my Trooper.
right.
Um, Actually, I have two diesels. I have a Daihatsu that's a diesel as well,
Oh, cool.
and I drive a lot here. I mean, I drive a lot out in the country and stuff. So it's highway driving at relatively low speeds, you know,
Right,
and for fairly long distances. Not much city kind of stop and go. Um,
right.
Repairs are much more expensive. I mean, you know, any kind of diesel component is going to be more expensive.
Okay.
But oil changes are further between,
Mhm.
and I mean you have the fuel filter that you have to make sure you replace and all that kind of stuff. But I mean my motor is almost bulletproof. It's rare that I have an issue with it. Whereas gas motors, while they can be bulletproof, you really have to build them to be that way.
Right.
Um, so
I mean, unless you buy an old small block Chevy, those things will run forever.
yeah, those will run. Those will run without oil. I'm not saying you should do that, but they will. I've seen them.
Yeah, I've had a few vehicles show up at. I used to work at my uncle's shop when I was a teenager, and we'd have certain vehicles come in for an oil change. I'd put a drain pan under them, and I'd get less than a quart of oil coming out.
Yeah,
And I'm like, dude, they're like, oh, it was fine. It didn't make any noise.
yeah. It didn't make any screeching or clanking or grinding, so that was good. Well, my dad, to help out a friend of ours back in, oh man, I don't know what year it was, like 84, 85, had a Chevette. Okay,
Okay.
it was a little, just a little Chevette. The floors were completely rusted out, which was typical for him. And he just gave it to her to help her out because she was really down on her times and whatnot. And she actually drove it for months and never even added oil, never changed the oil, whatever. And one day the motor seized.
Right.
Well, they go, and my dad like puts a breaker bar and a socket on the front, the flywheel, and gives it a good tug, and it broke loose.
Wow.
Yeah, it didn't seize good. It wasn't a hard seize. They put more oil in it, cranked up, and ran for years and years. I was like,
Wow.
what? No. But yeah, I kid you not. I've never heard of that happening before, but it did happen.
Wow. I had a friend who he had bought was it a Suzuki? No, it was a Geo Tracker, which
Yeah.
is kind of like a Samurai, but I mean,
It's a Vitara.
yeah. And so it was a Geo Tracker, convertible top. It was a super fun little truck, and so he bought it for like next to nothing. And one of our friends was kind of he needed a vehicle to get around, and so my buddy goes, all right, well, you know what, I'll let you buy it in payments, and it was like $100 payments a month, and I think he sold it to him for like it was like $600 or something. So yeah, it was like dirt cheap. He really didn't need it, so he's like, all right, cool, you can have it. And so this kid starts driving it around and totally wasn't checking the oil level. And he's like, dude, make sure you check the oil level. It leaks oil. Well, no, he drove it around for a couple of months and it was leaking and leaking and leaking. And eventually one day he calls us. He goes, hey, he's like, my truck won't start. We're like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, I don't know if the battery's dead or whatnot, but it won't kick over. We're like, all right. And so he couldn't get it to start. So he had it towed to my buddy's place. And so we're trying to work on this thing. And he's like, hey, my buddy's like, dude, give me a hand. He's like, I don't understand why the motor won't kick over. The battery's charged. He goes, I put a fresh battery in it and it won't kick over. I'm like, dude, did he check the oil? He goes, no. I'm like, does it have any oil? He's like, doesn't look like it.
Oh, there's your problem.
So we try to break it loose. We pushed it down his driveway, which is a bit steep. And I was like, all right, you'll just pop the clutch, you know? I was like, put it in gear and reverse and pop the clutch as it rolls down, and hopefully it'll break the engine loose. Because we really couldn't, there was no way we could kick the engine over. We couldn't do it by hand. So we gave that a couple of shots, and oh my God, the rear tires would just lock up on the thing. Like as soon as he popped the clutch, there was no give to that engine. It was fully seized. It was like welded shut.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things I do remember about the situation with her is that it was making kind of an awful noise, right? And
Right.
as she pulled in the driveway, she turned it off, and instead of it coming to a soft, die out of the motor, it like kind of clunk,
Oh,
so
geez.
it just seized at that last, which I'm sure helped a lot. But yeah, it was really weird that thing actually cranked back up again. I was like, no.
Wow.
I mean, as a kid, I didn't know, I was just a kid. But like today, thinking about it, I'm like, how in the world did that thing ever actually get back running? But yeah. So
Wow.
it's like, I don't know. And it's like, it seems like the people that need it the most are the ones that check it the least. Like, people
Right, yeah.
that don't have any other car, they're the ones that don't maintain their car.
Right.
It's like, oh no, I don't know what I'll do if my car breaks down on me. But yet,
Right.
they never do maintenance on it,
Right.
I'm like,
Exactly.
makes no sense.
Yeah. I tend to have the problem where I'll fix one truck, and then so I basically go through periods, like seasons, I would call it. I'll have a season where pretty much every vehicle I own has one big major problem with it that needs to be addressed, and I'm like, oh man, I have nothing reliable now. And then I'll just hammer down and I'll go, all right, I'm gonna fix everything, and I'll get everything fixed little by little. And by the time I have everything in running shape, I'm like, sweet. But then it's like not desert season, so I can't go off roading, and I'm like,
That's why it's in running shape.
yeah, exactly. So I guess it could be that, but I've been towed back many a times from the desert, so
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's a worthy investment.
I mean, I used to think, just to kind of give you a little bit of background on me. I don't know how much you've listened to the show or whatnot, but I've worked in mechanic shops as a kid, young teenager, as a helper. I have worked in body shops where we did a lot of the pull apart so that the insurance companies would pay us instead of paying the mechanic shop to do the same work, I've done a lot of my own mechanic work, but I don't consider myself to be a mechanic,
Okay.
Like if somebody says, hey man, my car's making this noise, I'm like, well, it could be this or that, but there's a guy over there that you should call and go take it to him. My diagnostic skills, I don't feel are to that degree.
Well, let me ask you this. If anything should ever happen in any of your vehicles, could you get it down the road 30 miles away?
I would say about if 75-80% of things happen to, you know what I mean? Of anything happen to my truck, yeah, I could.
So you're a mechanic. You're smart enough not to fix other people's problems.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I could. I just don't want to get involved in it,
Right.
And I hate that. Well, you said it was probably this, and you changed that, and that didn't fix it. And I'm like, I don't want to go through those hassles. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I have a hard time. Like one thing I hate is electrical. I am bad at electrical. I am dyslexic, and reading all those stupid schematics, and forget it, man. Just forget it. I get lost. So no.
Oh.
But so like with all of that kind of stuff, right? You're constantly working on your trucks, but I'm sure you're having to do like Mustang work too, right?
Yeah. It's generally easier because I've only been doing it for I think probably a month and a half or 2 months now. So there's not a whole lot going on just yet. But I have been out to a couple of shops. Like we did for instance, we did a supercharger install on it was an upgrade actually. It was a 2003 Ford Mustang Cobra, and so those are they call them the Terminator Cobras. It's an independent rear suspension. It's not great, but it's all right. So they were taking out the Ford factory supercharger on it, and they installed I believe it was a 2.4 liter Kenny Bell, and the thing it was insane. So factory, I think they were rated at somewhere like 325 horsepower at the flywheel. So who knows at the wheels? I'm not quite sure what that would be, but
depends on all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it even depends on the temperature that day, you know.
Yeah.
But the setup that we had on it when we dynoed it, because the guy had a smaller pulley on it and a couple of mods, and I think it ended up dynoing like 438 horsepower, something like that. After we did the Kenny Bell supercharger swap, the thing put out 618 rear wheel horsepower.
Wow. Yeah.
So,
wow.
It was
rear wheel.
Yeah.
So it was like 640 flywheel.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, that sounds about right.
About right. I mean, you can't. It could be a little less, could be a little more, depending on the drivetrain and all kinds of stuff. Especially with like CVs in the rear as an independent, you get a lot. You lose a lot there. So
right.
Wow, that's. I hope he's upgraded those CVs in the rear.
Generally speaking, they'll hold up. I think the power it's a little strange. The way the power is made, it doesn't come on strong off the line. I mean, you can definitely, if you're not smart about it, you can do some damage. But generally speaking, you can make the car hook up, and 600 horsepower is about really where you want to. I think I would call it the max that you'd want to do on a car like that. That being said, there's guys that are definitely pushing to 700 and 800 horsepower with like an E85 fuel system. So yeah, there's guys that are pushing the limits, but yeah, they're replacing axle shafts pretty often, more than likely.
I mean, at that point, you're getting into basically the same topic you get into with off-roading, which is it smart to keep the axle you've got versus just investing in a custom built or a swap out of another vehicle that's a factory swap that's capable of handling that power,
Right.
So,
that's kind of what I ran into with the Bronco.
Yeah, I mean, and see, that's, by the way, I was talking to you a little bit about the Mustang side of it too, just to give some of the newer listeners and some people who may have not been really involved in hot rod stuff, a concept of how all this can easily relate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Components can be different, clearly, because Ford manufactures a different style axle and all that stuff for their cars.
Right.
But the principles, the concepts are very, very similar, right? I mean, that's the idea.
I mean, even the differential itself, it's still a Ford 8.8 in that Cobra, and which is the same thing I have in my pre-runner Bronco, 8.8. Yeah. I have the entire full width axle, whereas they just have the center section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have a center housing, and then it has the CV joints on the CV axles that come out of it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so cool though to me, because I always thought growing up, I was into cars. I was like off-roading. I just wasn't into it. I mean, I wasn't. The guys I knew who were into it just didn't really encourage me to really, go that way.
Right.
And it was like when I got older, not that I'm old, but as I became an adult, I started realizing this stuff all just is really, really comparable. If you know how to set timing on one, you know how to set timing on another. You just have to figure out the nuances of it.
Right. Yeah.
So
they're all interrelated in one way or another.
So you said you took the diesel out, and that was what you took out to Easter Jeep Safari, right? And you said it had open diffs on it?
Well, technically, it's got ARB air lockers.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, they would be completely locked if you had the ARB air compressor hooked up to it. Except it's a project truck, a magazine project truck, so sometimes things don't go quite as planned.
I can't help it, man. I know. I live your life, and I don't even work for a magazine company. I get a component installed, but it's only halfway installed, and I'm like,
Right.
does it have it? Yeah, it has it. Does it work? No.
Yeah, so it was worse than more than likely if it had a factory limited slip, where it might grab a little bit. This one was fully open,
Wow.
but the saving grace to that truck was the notorious Ford frame flex that everybody always complains about. That's what kept it going through the rocks.
Yeah,
that amount of frame flex kept all the tires on the ground.
Yeah, my dad has a Ford F-150 Sport. I think it's called a Sport model. It's got the 5.0 in it. It's short wheelbase. It's 4-wheel drive.
Wow.
Got that crazy little torsion axle up front. It's.
Oh, I love that. The twin traction beam.
Yeah, I don't know about that thing, man.
You go fast with those.
Yeah, they're great for that. They are. I mean, I know a lot of people love them for the desert, but for overall off-roading, they're kind of wonky and I don't know.
Well, yeah, if you build them wrong, they won't do very well. I've got a long travel suspension online from Solo Motorsports. I can jump the thing pretty high. I've had it up at least maybe 4 or 5 feet in the air. Lands smooth. Truck just runs really fast through whoop sections. It's faster than a Raptor. It doesn't have as much power as a Raptor, but it'll definitely smoke it through whoops. And it can still crawl. I still have the use of 4-wheel drive. I have 15 inches of wheel travel up front and still in 4-wheel drive. You can have it in 4-wheel drive and it articulates perfectly. So it's fun.
And it's funny because I've read different stuff about them. I've read they're not that good. I've read other people like you that just really love them. They say they're an awesome axle. I look at it and I just don't really understand it. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of like...
Yeah, I think that the thing with those is... So if you plan on going with a tire that's bigger than a 35, for instance, you probably want to get a solid axle. A 35 is perfect on that. You're not gonna really snap axle shafts unless you really hammer on it hard. The biggest things with those is people say, oh well, it wanders when you're going down the road. Generally speaking, it's people who don't maintain their trucks, so they have worn out ball joints, worn out tie rods, and their beam pivots start coming loose. So they start blaming it on the suspension when the reality is they just have loose components on it.
Well, I mean, my dad's is a 92, maybe?
Right? Yeah,
something like that. Because
so he's manual T case, huh?
Yeah, sure does.
It was the last year you could get the manual transfer case.
It's an automatic, but he does have the manual T case in it. Yeah.
That was the last year you could get it.
Yeah, I wish he'd get it running again. I've done some work on it and stuff for him, but I think the injectors need to be cleaned. It really had... I don't remember what all I had to do to it. I had to do a few things to it. His fuel tank was... it set for 5 years with gasoline in the fuel tank and in the fuel lines. And you know how gas is these days. 5 years, it just turned to... It was like throwing out... what is that stuff called that you you cut varnish with?
It's varnish.
Yeah, it turned that yellow, super like vinegary smell. It was awful.
Oh, I hate that smell.
Yeah, it was awful. So instead of changing out the fuel pump, because the fuel pump wasn't sending, because it was just caked with...
Right.
We changed out the whole gas tank, fuel pump, inline fuel pump, because it has one of those rail mount, chassis rail mount pressurized pumps as well. But it still runs a little off, and I think the injectors are just clogged up and stuff from all that nasty gas being in it all that time.
Right, it could be.
Yeah.
Do you guys have ethanol in your gasoline, or?
I don't know. He's in Georgia, and I have to ask him. I think so, though. I think that they said that they've been putting it in there to supplement it, so it, more.
Oh, okay. So yeah, more than likely, it's at least probably 15%, or not 15%, at least 10%.
Yeah.
Which, it deteriorates a bunch of stuff.
I mean, the hosing, I had to change out some of the hosing because it was just like nasty inside
Yeah.
the fuel sending lines and all that kind of stuff too, you know. But it's a cool little truck. It's a cool little truck. I wish I could drive it. It's just been sitting there for years. It has the typical paint problem where all the paint is like oxidizing off of it, you know.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, the chassis is that typical C channel, and
Yeah.
you jack up the back side, even on a short
Yeah.
wheelbase. You jack up the back side right axle, and the whole chassis just kind of,
Yeah.
you know, it's just like, I'm like,
Yeah. The bed goes one way and the body goes the other.
I'm like, I don't know that this is right.
Yeah, it's a frame flex.
Yeah.
It's normal. All those open C channel frames did that.
And
It's less noticeable on a Bronco where the entire cab is attached front to rear, but yeah, on a pickup you'll notice it.
But do they still make their chassis C the C channel?
I think there's a combination of. I think they like. I don't know if they use one section that's C channel and then one that's boxed. I think the front sections are boxed. I'm not quite sure though. I haven't really been paying attention to that. Kappa would be a good person to ask about that. Except he would tell you that the Ram is the best one.
I know. That's Kappa.
He's gonna hate me for that.
You just have to take Kappa for what he is and leave it alone. So everybody knows that's listening out there in listener land. Me and Gusto actually got to know each other a little bit more because one day Kappa was on Jeep Talk, right?
Right. Yeah.
And he was answering live questions on Facebook through Jeep Talk, and me and Gusto were sending all kinds of stupid, you know, questions. We were just giving him a hard time, you know. So we kind of fell into good favor with each other, and we've chatted from time to time since then. But we both like John as well. He's a good guy, and he knows a lot of information. He's very, very smart with a lot of this stuff. So, but yeah, we will pick at him from time to time. So that's
right.
That's just how it is.
Oh man, it's let me see if I can flip this around real quick. That's covering an axle right there. I've got more boxes over there. Yeah, it gets addicting. I save them to basically lay them down to work on trucks and to cover an axle that I bought and that I had powder or sandblasted that I don't want to get rusted up. So yeah. I was able to primer it the same night that I picked it up. Wasn't able to spray any paint on it, so I made sure to keep it all covered up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a big refrigerator box that we bought a refrigerator in, and it's been with us now 7 years. And it's that same idea, you know. It's like I lay on it outside, I weld on it, all kinds of stuff, because here it rains so much in the morning, it's guaranteed to have rained at night. So when I go out there, I lay down a like a 1/4 inch thick rubber mat.
Yeah.
I bought like that flooring for restaurants and that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's like 1 meter wide, 3 feet wide by, you know, however long. And I lay that down, I put the cardboard on top of it, and keeps me dry, you know. It's more comfortable. I'm not laying like on a rock under my back since I don't have cement, you know. It's like a lot better. Right. I like them.
I like refrigerator boxes, and I really wish that there was a company that just sold refrigerator boxes that were empty. It would just make it so much easier on guys like us. You know?
Yeah, I know. I tell you what. I mean, they're the perfect width. You can fold them in half. You have two sides, so they're double thick. Yeah, they're awesome, man. Man, we could start a whole podcast on uses for boxes.
Not just that. I mean, right now, when you mentioned a meter, you know, I had to think real quick. Okay, how big is a meter exactly? And I
mean, there's nothing wrong with the imperial system, but the metric system is definitely more precise. I used to hate it before I moved to Chile, or when I first moved. I was going insane. Right. And to this day, it's still a little complicated because meters and even millimeters. You there, man?
Some technical difficulties.
Yeah, the internet just kind of drops here sometimes. The metric, though, it used to really bother me. I mean, it really annoyed me. but now I've grown accustomed to it, you know.
Right.
But what is cumbersome about it is when you have to relate it to imperial,
Right.
because the millimeters have
Right.
micromillimeters basically too.
Right.
So you can have 7.6 millimeters, you know,
Right.
and like quarter inch and that kind of stuff a lot of times doesn't really fit at 6 millimeters. It's really 6.2 whatever, you know what I mean?
I get into those arguments with John where he says, "Well, he's like, no, you need the imperial system, because what would you do for a half-inch bolt or a half-inch like say a bolt you would need a half-inch wrench on?" I go, "Well, that's easy. It's a 13 millimeter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do it all the time." And he's like, "What about a 9/16?" So I was like, "A 14 fits on a 9/16,
Yep.
way tighter.
Yep.
That thing won't strip it."
No, well, my dad sent me a set of channel lock box end
Yeah.
ratchet wrenches, right?
Okay.
And they were imperial, of course. And
Okay.
I was like, dang, I'm never going to be able to use these things here. But I found, you know, I carry the 5/8 and the 9/16 with me everywhere I go because they fit. 16 millimeter is 5/8. 14 millimeter is 9/16. And half inch is 13.
Yeah.
So.
And 19 millimeters 3/4.
Oh yeah, sure is, because it's really like 18.75 millimeters or something. So.
Right. Yeah.
It's no.
I mean, it's as close as you can get to it.
Yeah, it's no more play in the wrenches than a half-inch wrench is, because a half-inch wrench isn't like hammering it on with a hammer to get it around the head of the bolt. It's not that tight anyway. They build play into it. You know.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sold, man. I mean, I will say this though, it is frustrating trying to memorize some of the numbers though for like components to off-road vehicles.
Right.
Because I bought spacers for my truck, for my Trooper.
Okay.
2-inch spacers, because I have the factory aluminum wheels that I find to be hideously ugly, and they're all help me out here, negative inset. So the face is as close to the outside as possible, right? Is that right? Or is that positive?
Okay, yeah. So you've got like modern wheels where, because newer vehicles are wider, they have a wider track width. Modern wheels aren't really built conveniently.
Yeah.
Like this.
Yeah, exactly. I love those things, man.
Would be out here.
Yeah, exactly. And they're aluminum, so I keep them because they're lightweight and they're better fuel efficiency, you know. But when I put 265 75s, which are what, like 32.5 approximately?
Yes, somewhere close to that, I think.
32.7 something, right? When I put those on the truck, they were rubbing.
Okay.
So I had to separate them out, you know. But the problem was with my manual locking hubs, because I did the manual locking hub conversion on it, and I used the Ison off of a Toyota.
Right. Yeah.
The spacers wouldn't fit around it. The center hole hub wasn't big enough.
Oh, okay.
So I bought them, and then I had to take them I had to take the two fronts to a machine shop and have them turn them out, you know. And they're like, "How many millimeters is that?" And I'm like, "It's 10 centimeters, 0.8 or whatever, you know, 10.8 centimeters." So it's 108 millimeters. I'm like, "Whoa, hold on. Now you're going from centimeters to millimeters. Let my mind work this out, you know."
Right.
That's where I start getting confused. It's like, yeah, I need 1,085 millimeters. And I'm like, hold on. What is that? Oh, that's a meter 85. Yeah, okay, I got you. You know,
right.
But it makes my mind kind of.
Yeah, it's like my Bilstein shocks are 60 millimeter. So I guess that would be 6 centimeters, right?
Yeah.
Right, and I think in inches it's something like it's just a little bit bigger than a 2.5-inch shock.
Yeah, but so, just, I mean, millimetrically bigger, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just slightly bigger because it still uses a 3-inch coil spring.
Yeah.
So, which a 2.5-inch shock uses. So yeah, it's interesting to see all that.
Well, and for the same reason, these companies, even that are more predominant in the States, are going to millimetric sizing because
Right.
you can make something with just enough extra that it gives you the performance you're looking for without having to go that extra that the imperial system requires you to do.
Right. And I mean, the thing is, so the shocks that I have are Bilstein. So, they're a German company. So,
Oh
so I
yeah,
guess, it's not quite the same. I think
it's easy
they're
for them.
still, yeah, they're doing it right.
Yeah. What shot do you have?
I have Bilstein 9100 coilovers. They're 12-inch stroke shocks. So the fronts are coilovers and the rears are smooth bodies. The reservoirs are, I believe, 18 inches long on each one of them. So yeah, they're pretty long. The front's got anti-cavitation valves, what they call their ACVs. Basically, looks like a black valve at the end of the remote
Yeah.
reservoir.
Isn't it
Or actually,
adjustable?
no, it's not actually.
Okay.
It's
Oh
so
no, they have the
basically,
4 holes in them or something like that, right?
yeah. There's like small orifices on it. So basically, as your suspension cycles, it'll push through that ACV valve, and it's almost like an extra layer of damping. Um, but there's something to it where whatever they've done to it, I on this years ago, but it keeps the fluid from cavitating. So at high speeds, when the shocks are just traveling, at
Yeah.
insane speeds, it'll ensure that the fluid isn't getting like bubbles of air bubbles inside. So that helps because air doesn't cushion as well as shock oil does.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Off-Road Independence is the proud sponsor of Oregon Trail Off-Road. Stewards of the trail, ambassadors of adventure. Don't know who they are? Stop by and check them out at OregonTrailOffroad.com. Not only that, but you'll be able to see their first 3 episodes of their web series, One Lane Road, and check them out as they continue to progress and organize themselves for their ultimate adventure. Not only that, but you'll be able to see on their site how you can help them out, and if nothing else, you'll just be able to hang out and enjoy the ride.
All right. So before we go on to what we were talking about, I was doing a save, everybody. So there was a little bit of lapse of time that you guys missed out on, and me and Gusto were talking about a bunch of stuff that you'll never get to hear about. But that's your loss. That's my privilege and your loss. No, I'm just messing. We're gonna cover it as well. We were talking about your bypass shocks with the Bilsteins.
Oh yeah, they're not actually bypass shocks. They're
Oh,
they're
they have the
9100.
reservoirs. Sorry.
Yeah, they're 18-inch reservoirs on them. They're 60 millimeter Bilstein 9100 coilovers on the front. 12-inch stroke shocks. The rears are 12-inch strokes as well. They're Bilstein 9100 smooth body shocks,
Okay.
and both have the fronts have ACV valves on them. So it's anti-cavitation valves, which keeps the oil from getting air bubbles in it, which ensures that you can go through whoop sections without basically getting shock fade, where your truck would start kind of bouncing around uncontrollably. The rears don't really. You don't really, at least Bilstein doesn't recommend ACV valves for the rear, unless you're driving something like a buggy, probably like a class 1 or I would even say maybe even a class 10, like Baja,
Yeah,
like
like
Score.
a traditional style buggy, right, with the long A arms and that kind of stuff on them.
Right. Yeah. Like a fully unlimited buggy is
Yeah.
kind of more than that, because you'll basically get a lot more movement to it, and I think the car is so light that you could get away with it.
So, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like, why? And you may not know this. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but like, why the ACV valves up front and not the rear though? Because I mean, on the front of your Bronco, for instance, right? That's where all the weight is, and that's where the impacts of each bounce is going to be heavier, and that's
Right.
usually over time at speed is what froths up the oils, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
And
why wouldn't the rear need it?
so a Bronco is actually kind of unique in the way that the weight balance on Broncos is pretty much 50-50.
Oh, okay.
So it's got a really good weight distribution. That's why whenever they jump them, you see them kind of just stay straight. They never nosedive, unless you do something wrong. But
That's a different
but
story.
yeah, exactly. But that being said, because you don't want the front end. So what Bilstein says essentially is an ACV valve will make the valving a little stiffer, so that when it hits a big hole, so basically the more speed, the bigger the hole. When it hits it, it'll stiffen up the valving. You don't want that in the rear really, because in the front you just want it to take it. The rear you want it to just give,
Yeah.
so that it can get through the hole.
Be real supple with it.
Yeah, because otherwise it'll kick the rear up
Yeah.
if it's too stiff. At least that's the idea behind it.
Yeah.
That being
Avoid
said,
recoil then is kind of the idea.
yeah, and that being said, I think it doesn't apply to all vehicles, because I think some of the buggy guys do run ACV valves in the rear. But that again, that's a unique thing to Bilstein. Some of the other shock manufacturers might have a different technology they're using on their end. So, most of these guys are using bypass shocks anyway. So triple bypass shocks. So their suspensions are fully adjusted versus a street driven truck.
So I've done a little bit of research on it, so I kind of have an idea. But I'm going to ask you for your opinion on it. For those who may not know, okay? So.
Okay.
What's the difference between first off, what's the benefit that you understand of a bypass shock in comparison to a monotube or you know what I mean? Just a performance long travel shock.
Right. Okay. So to start off, your basic shock probably is like you shouldn't really be running like a twin tube shock, I would say. Yeah.
Go ahead. But that's up for you. That's up to you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, some people might have done it way back in the days, but a twin tube shock, you basically have a very small piston inside. So, while people look at the shock physically, it might have a body that's say about that thick. The reality is the internal body that's sliding into that is probably smaller, which means the piston is about that size. So it's probably half the size of a conventional monotube shock. So a monotube shock, like for instance, Bilstein's 5100, 5100 or B6 shock, or like
5165 or whatever Bilstein has as well.
Right. Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, I was basically talking about like their entry level.
Oh yeah,
because
the 65 has a reservoir on it, right, or something like that as well. Yeah.
Right, and in some applications you might not be able to fit the reservoir, so you might just want to go with a 51. But even like a Fox 2.0, something like that. And I think even Rancho has a RS7000 monotube now. That's pretty nice.
Thought I had seen something on that too.
Yeah, and so those are monotube shocks. The pistons are the size of the shock body. I mean, the inside diameter at the very least, and these are nitrogen charged shocks, so it helps fight cavitation, which twin tube shocks more than likely, the cavitation is a big problem with twin tubes. Monotubes will perform a lot better off road, and then from then on, you move up to shocks like coilovers and bypasses. So you basically go to bigger and bigger shocks, like bigger bodies, and when you get to the point of bypass shocks, you're basically taking a shock that you can tune so that it'll ride. Bypass shocks aren't ideal for the street. They're basically they're best left for off-road use only. That being said, there's plenty of people who drive with them on the street.
A lot of people love these bypass shocks on the street, and I'm like, why didn't you just get a monotube? It's not half the price, but it's considerably cheaper, and
a lot less than that. Yeah,
and you don't need, and you'll get a better overall performance if you.
Right.
I'm going to put a number out there, and I don't know if you agree with it, but I think monotube shocks are good for people who drive 60 or 70% street, and maybe 40, 30% off-road.
I would venture to say most people probably don't need bypass shocks. unless you're one of the guys that's really hammering your truck off road, going really fast, or hitting rocks at high speeds, you're probably and by high speeds I mean like stuff that you kind of want to crawl over. King of the Hammers type racing, or Baja type racing. Those are the guys that need bypass shocks. Like for instance, my Bronco doesn't have bypass shocks on it, and I don't feel like it needs it, especially for my driving style. I have a pretty tame driving style. That being said, I can go pretty fast in it, but I really don't feel the need to have bypass shocks. Like some people do it for the looks. Some people actually use. I've got friends who will do over 90 miles per hour through the desert, and yeah, that's one of those areas where I would never push my truck that fast. Certainly not without a cage. But yeah, a bypass shock, because you can control the different zones of the shock. So basically, it'll push through one zone faster. That's why there's like a tube on the outside of it, and it pushes a fluid through this bypass chamber, and it recirculates and comes out on a different side of the shock. It's basically so that you can have the piston travel up real fast and then hit a different zone with a different force of damping on it. So bypass shocks are great
for their purpose.
For their purpose, yeah, but they click a lot unless you like JD Fab, which Kappa's really good friends with them. He grew up with them. They do. Kappa told me about one thing they do with their bypass shocks, where basically they don't leave the check balls in there. Where basically with a bypass shock, when you're going over like small stuff like that's just kind of vibrating your truck, like tick click tick tick, you hear the little balls going click 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 click. It sounds like a typewriter's writing in your truck. Gotcha. So JD Fab modifies their shock so that the check valves are, I believe, welded or something like that. So in a sense, they can get away with it. Their shocks, basically, they can adjust it infinitely. They don't have to leave it at a certain spot, because they can adjust everything that they need to without the check ball being loose in there bouncing around. The truck will drive on the street through small little bumps. Like you can go over railroad tracks and you're not going to hear little marbles in there. You won't get typewriter sound.
Honestly, I've never ridden in a vehicle that had bypass on them. I've never owned bypass shocks, so I don't know. But I do drive a lot of gravel roads that are really potholed. I mean, like really potholed, because here where I live, there are a lot of fish hatcheries. And so you have 18-wheelers that have water tanks that carry, fish in them.
Yeah.
And it's like they usually have because they usually use like European vehicles for the big heavy equipment kind of stuff here.
Yeah.
You have a lot of like Scania. Is that the name of the company? Volvo, Scania. Renault, 18-wheelers or whatever. But a lot of them aren't like a tractor trailer. They have a flatbed built onto the back of them, but it's longer than typical, right?
I think in Spanish they call them a torton, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then they have another trailer hooked to that. So they're well over, 53 feet. They're pretty big. And you can imagine all these tanks filled with water and fish in them. So they just hammer these gravel roads, and it rains like 200 days a year here, so they're just horrible.
Wow.
And so in the Trooper, I've been thinking about putting some better shocks on it, because I get shock fade. Even at 45 miles an hour, you start to get shock fade over time, because it's just so many kilometers or miles of road. But the best I do is a monotube. I've been looking at the 5100s.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need much more than that. I mean, I've seen guys that are run their trucks with 5100s, like on a Bronco that's got stock suspension, twin I-beam Bronco, like the pickup truck that your dad has. Basically, they'll have like a 2-inch lift on the front, which is kind of just like a leveling coil, and they'll run 5100 shocks front and rear, and they'll hammer their truck through Baja, all like nasty stuff, and they're like, oh my god, it could actually keep up. Like it can do, I would say, I would say you can do 80% of what your typical pre-runner Bronco can do out there. It's that 20% that'll get you where
Yeah.
you really need to slow down.
Some of those bigger whoops that come up on you quick, or those
Yeah.
those silt patches where it's a dip that you didn't really see that well. And
Well, here's the thing: if you're gonna fall into silt, like if I've done that before, where there's like a 4-foot drop off into a silt bed, and I was doing it with my engine sputtering around on my green Bronco on the pre-runner.
why would you do that?
Well, I was trying to limp it back to camp. I was at
You
the
picked
US
the wrong direction, bro.
Oh yeah. No, I was oh, it almost fell over. I was near the U.S. Mexico border, and we were by like Highway 8 or something, and we had just filled up our tanks. We had been in the desert, and I was telling Kappa, I'm like, "Hey, dude, my truck's overheating. I'm losing fluid. Like something's up with it. It's running kind of funky."
Don't worry about it. Just go on.
Well, no, he's like, "Oh, we're gonna hit the highway right now." So an hour later. Like we kept going through the trails. Like I was almost like ready to bail from the group because I was like, I just couldn't find the way out of there. Though we were in the middle of the desert. I'm like, man, this is not gonna end well. Like this truck might end up dying here. And lo and behold, we hit the highway and everything was running smooth. Get to a gas station. I filled up because I was also low on fuel. So filled up, hit the highway, and within 5 minutes of leaving the highway or leaving the gas station. Of course, after we had our ice cream.
Oh, yeah.
That's better than ice cream in the desert. And we hit the highway, and my truck just starts running really bad. And it felt like I was going up like a 6% grade.
Wow.
And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, okay, there is a slight hill to this road, but it's like maybe I would say maybe like a 2-foot rise in like 2 miles.
Yeah.
Maybe. Maybe.
Not too much of a grade then.
Not at all, exactly. So it was a crazy hill. You could probably skateboard up that hill, and I was like, man, it's like it shot down my speed to like 55, then 50, then it was having a hard time going over 45. I was like, and I started sputtering. I was like, this isn't good. So we pulled over at the USG sheetrock place, and so I started trying to figure out what the heck's going on with my truck, and couldn't figure it out. We tried a bunch of things. And we couldn't figure it out, so we're like, all right, well, it still runs. Let's just try to limp it back to camp. Well, when I tried to get going, I could barely do, I think, 30 miles per hour, 35 tops. And in order to get up to that speed, I had to cruise it. I had to idle all the way up to that. Like if I tried to stab the throttle to get it to move quickly, it would just sputter out and die. Like it would stall.
Oh wow!
So I had to get it to do that. Mind you, this whole time before that, we were wheeling in a bunch of like desert terrain, like trails, like slow stuff, Yeah. It wasn't like, I like the fast stuff. Well, lo and behold, when my truck brakes, we hit these fast sections of whoops with nice, just like, sand washes. Like, it was beautiful. I was like, oh, dude, I could do like, I already had my long travel suspension on it. I knew I could easily cruise that thing at 65 through that stuff. And I'm like, and now I have to hit it at 35 or 30, like, it sounded like a train trying to get moving, like.
Dude, that's not good.
Yeah, it was barely going. I'm like, we basically followed like this train track over by Superstition Mountain, and over in Ocotillo Wells in the California desert, and follow these train tracks, and there's a bunch of soft sand next to it, so it's fun. Like if you could go all out there, that'd be a fun section to cruise, And all my friends are having fun, just, hitting the throttle and passing me. And here I am just sputtering at 30. If I'd hit like super soft sand, it would start slowing down to about 15.
Wow.
But I got through it. At the very end, it turns like a little bit like to the left. And it goes around. And at that point, we're only about, I'd say, maybe 10 miles away from our camp. And there's a silt bed there that I remembered. I was doing about 30, 35 at the time. And I remember I was like, oh crap, there's a silt bed coming up, and I had no room to bail out. So my options were hit the brakes and try to ease into the silt bed, probably get stuck, and I'm not going to be able to drive it out because it has no power to move.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not going to keep going through it at idle. Or know that it's a 4-foot drop into it, and my truck's gonna be doing 35 or 30 miles per hour when it goes into it, and it still might get stuck, but it also might break something.
Yeah.
I chose to go faster. Always choose faster.
Always choose
So
faster. When in doubt,
yeah,
throttle out.
yeah, and you know, to its credit, it landed right in there, nice and soft, and it just went boop, 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 and it just kept going.
Wow.
It drove out of there at like 15 miles per hour, but man, it made it through, and I was so
I'm
happy
surprised
that
you
it got
got
out.
through a silt bed.
Oh yeah. Well, not just that. The next day, since I still couldn't figure it out, I drove the truck 30 miles away to get it towed, back
Wow.
home.
Yeah.
And with the wind pushing me, because I didn't realize this, we were headed east, and the wind was flowing east, so it was gusting east, and the truck was able to do about 55. So I was like, oh, you know what? It's not too bad. I'm like, that's a pretty decent speed. I was like, if I can do this all the way to the gas station, I'll be cool. And once I started going up a little hill, I noticed there's a guy towing a trailer behind me, and I was like, all right, he's gonna pass me right at about the crest of the hill. I was like, I just can't. If I pull over, I was like, I need to get out of his way because I'm gonna run out of steam here real quick. I was like, and if I let off right here, it's just not gonna have any power to keep going. Like, it's gonna take forever to build up that speed again.
Yeah.
So my buddy was behind me in his Bronco. He was kind of watching my back, and so we just kind of both, I guess, thought the same thing. We drove off the road, so right off the highway, just and right into the sand. The guy passes us, and they both look down, and they're staring at me, going the same speed they're going. So we're going like 50. They're on the road. I'm going through whoops at 50, and the truck's taking it like no problem. And they just kind of smiled and kept on going. But man, as soon as we turned north, I was kind of facing the wind a bit.
Oh no, and
Ooh.
it's like died it's like roll.
it went like I think it wouldn't go more than 35, and it was bad. This is a highway with a 55 mile per hour minimum speed limit.
So everybody's doing 75.
Right, or 80, and I'm doing 35 through there. I'm like using all of the shoulder anytime someone gets up on me. And the wind starts gusting really bad. Every time it would hit like a slight hill in the road, it would get down to like 27, 25 miles per hour. It was pretty bad, but it made it all the way to the gas station.
So what happened? What was up with the truck?
Well, what ended up happening that we couldn't figure out was two of my spark plug cables had been arcing out on the manifold.
Oh.
All the cables were old and corroded, but two of them were actually touching the manifolds and were arcing out. So that started throwing the timing off.
I'm sorry, you know how ironic it is that you're an automotive journalist and you're running through the desert out in the middle of absolutely nowhere in a truck that has old corroded and cracked out.
Right. And to make matters worse, Kappa was there, and he also checked the truck.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna give him a hard time
that's
now.
how it goes.
No, it happens, man.
Yeah, no, I mean the cables were arcing out, so that made it sputter. The problem was that for us it sounded like a timing issue because the timing sounded way off.
Yeah.
Of course, part of that was because the cables were arcing out, but a major part of that was the truck was forcing itself so bad through the desert when I was trying to get up the hills to get off the road, or I mean to get back on the road, that I ended up bending the distributor, like the shaft in the oil pump.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something with that. Once it twisted the shaft that goes down to the oil pump, it kind of tweaked itself and did this. And the distributor gear had kind of walked loose on my distributor.
Yeah.
So it was hanging on by only one side of the pin, but it was kind of tweaked at an angle.
So you had the bad spark plug wires and a distributor that wasn't functioning properly either. Right.
Yeah. So long story short, now I have all MSC ignition on that Bronco too.
I can see why. No, I mean, well. This happened to me with a neighbor's vehicle. As I told you before, I choose not to work on people's vehicles, but a neighbor of ours, I try to help them out. They're an older couple, and he has a farm truck that they use on the farm, and it was like really, really bad. The whole ignition system was really bad. It's an electronic ignition. It's computer driven. It's not distributor. And so I was looking around, and thankfully enough, I just caught it out of the glimpse of my eye because I was about to put my hand on the manifold to lean over. It wasn't running. It hadn't been running but a few minutes, so it wasn't hot yet. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I wear my mechanic gloves, and I was trying to get to the back of the motor, and I saw the spark plug sparking off the manifold.
Right.
And I was like, it wouldn't have killed me, but it's not it's not pleasant to get a zap from spark plug wire.
No.
And I was like, well, there's your
It'll wake
problem.
you up
What?
It'll wake you up for sure.
Oh yeah. Well, that same truck had a problem, and I couldn't tell if it was that the head gasket was leaking, or if it was a fuel pump problem, because it had that really. I know that sounds weird, and people are like, how could you mistake those? But they can sound very similar in that clunk way that it was running. So I was just checking all the cylinders just to make sure all the cylinders were firing. And of course, pulling off the wire while it was running, it was like, okay, definitely all 4 cylinders are firing. It's just they're not firing well. But the third spark plug wire, I grabbed it and it shocked me, man. Pow! I was like, oh! And they're brand new wires. They're just cheap, those cheap.
Right. Yeah.
And so don't be grabbing cheap wires. They're not good. They don't insulate. But I mean, if they don't insulate, you grabbing it, imagine they're not conducting all that energy that well into the motor either.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I hate cheap products. I just.
Yeah, it's not good when they're doing that. It's you're losing a lot of spark in that.
Yeah.
So you might find that above 4,000 RPMs, the engine doesn't really do a whole lot, and that's typically why.
Yeah, it's just.
So
I hate cheap
it's
products.
Battle.
Yeah. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
Economics is always a factor. John is always making fun of me. Other people are always making fun of me because my economic situation here. But to live where I live in the States, I couldn't afford it. I just couldn't.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah.
It's worth it to me. But yeah, I have to be frugal. But that doesn't mean I want cheap. It just means I look for the best in value in between. You know what I mean? And that's the best I'm ever going to do with it. But at the same time, I don't subscribe to that mentality of buying the cheapest product and replacing it 50 times.
Right.
It's not worth it,
Right.
So, but to each their own, I guess.
Yeah.
Gusto, it was a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on the show, and everybody out there listening. Please don't forget to stop by and check out all my sites. I have a number of sites. You can check me out at offroadindependence.com, where you'll find this episode, these episodes, as well as beginnersfab.com. You have to ask Gusto what he thinks about beginnersfab.com behind my back so he can tell you the truth. And you can also check out ericmcgrew.tv. All those things are right there together so that you can check them out. I hope you enjoy what you find there. I'm trying to write a few more articles for both Off-Road Independence and Beginners Fab. What do you think about my articles, Gusto?
I think they're great.
Are they well written?
I think so.
So everybody, stop by, check out my stuff, and don't forget, if you'd like, you can support Off-Road Independence, help me have more interviews like I'm having now, and also be able to keep up the stuff with beginnersfab.com and ericmcgrew.tv by buying a shirt, sticker, other swag that I have available. Also, pretty soon, I'm hoping to get out in the trooper a little bit more, trying to get a camera guy to come with me, and I'm going to try to video some South American adventures. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah. But until next time, thanks, Gusto. It was a privilege. And thanks to everybody else who is listening. We'll be here for the next episode, so I hope you are too.